You can't believe everything you hear or see about UFOs in media. And I'm part of media. I'm a part of mainstream media. And, you know, media has been around a very long time. Media reporters have been giving out the news since way back in time when our ancestors were drawing or painting images on cave walls. But early men and women didn't have newspapers at the time to fill them in on things that were happening in the world around them. They had to rely on walls and big rocks as their tapestry on which to show things that they experienced in their lives. A major newspaper in this country, the New York Times, uses a motto, all the news that's fit to print. Well, I think they stole that from our ancestors because for them, way back then, it was pretty much all the news that's fit to paint. Early media reporters and just the people who lived back in those days, basically all that they did and all that they knew that they could do was to record what they saw, including things in the sky. Objects that very closely resemble modern-day images of what people are reporting today. Astronomer J. Allen Hynek, who was the Air Force's 20-year scientific consultant to their Project Blue Book study, he used to say that people around the world weren't reporting flying pink elephants. He said they're reporting very consistent types of flying vehicles, the kind that you see right here. The timeline of recorded UFO history includes the works of the Renaissance and medieval art, where strange circular objects showed up in the sky of many paintings. Again, all the news that's fit to paint. I almost said print, but to paint. This is a 15th century example called Madonna and Child with the infant St. John the Baptist. There are many examples of this kind of art, yet the artist included something else in the painting that seems to defy logic. When you zoom in on this particular painting, can you see some sort of circular craft in the sky? Now, skeptics or debunkers would always say that these kinds of paintings included religious symbolism. Okay, fine. But what is it symbolic of that we can relate to today? If you look closely, you'll see the artist went out of his way. Let's see if I can point this out on this side, on the bottom here, and on the bottom here. You can see the artist went out of his way to include a man and a dog on the ground, both looking up at the object. Why is this part of the painting? Was it something that the artist actually saw in the sky one day, or are we supposed to look at this and think that even the dog was affected by the symbolism of what he saw in the sky? Now, here's another example. This time a painting from 1710 called The Baptism of Christ. While a group of people are gathered below on the ground, a large circular object is depicted above them, shooting down rays or beams of light, supposedly aimed at Christ. A close-up view only raises more questions. What was this object? Why was it included in the painting? Was it a symbolic image of an angel of God? When it comes to UFO images of any kind and of any time period, it's important to ask, who do you believe? I'll come back to this concept of a beam shooting down from a UFO in just a few minutes. Two of the most controversial UFO images of all time were photographed by Paul and Evelyn Trent on their McMinnville, Oregon home in 1950. In this first shot, a circular object is clearly seen in the sky. This is a close-up of it. Then the object shifted its position, and Trent snapped another image of it. And he got this shot. And when we zoom in on it just a little bit more, we see this. These two images are widely considered to be the most famous UFO photos ever taken, and therefore, of course, the most hotly contested ones. But if out of the hundreds of thousands of UFO photos ever presented so far, if only one is the real thing, not a fake, not a hoax, not the planet Venus, not a conventional aircraft, not an optical illusion, and certainly not swamp gas, if only one is truly unidentified, then what explanation are we left with? Well, the official government study group, known as the Condon Committee, published its findings in 1968. And buried within the book, which pretty much debunked and explained away most UFO sightings, it said something totally different about the McMinnville pictures. And it basically said, this is one of the few UFO reports in which all factors investigated appear to be consistent that an extraordinary flying object flew within sight of two eyewitnesses. So I ask again, who do you believe? In 1958, a ship containing a member of the Brazilian Air Force, several scientists, and a group of explorers left. They were near the coast off of Brazil, near Trindade Island. And they all reportedly saw a strange object. It first appeared to them off the horizon, and then got closer and closer, and there's a whole sequence of photographs that show this. It approached the island, and then they noticed that it had what appeared to be a ring around it, like the planet Saturn. It's a pretty famous photograph. The object made a very steep turn, they reported, and then moved away very quickly. The images of the object were eventually confirmed and released as authentic by the president of Brazil. Skeptics and debunkers have come up with different stories to try and prove that this UFO was a hoax. But part of the problem was that there were so many eyewitnesses to it. So it remains a very compelling case. I was fascinated by these stories when I was growing up, and it always seemed to me that media in general always made fun of it all, as though anybody who dared to tell what they saw or photographed, they all had to be misinterpreting things in the sky or were just down and out lying. So after a 1973 wave of UFO sightings in the country were reported, and it caught my attention big time, I started doing a lot of research, read as much material as I could on the subject, and it eventually led me to produce a documentary record album for CBS called UFOs, The Credibility Factor. And as Peter mentioned before, it was the first time that a group of voices of military, government, law enforcement people all spoke out on a recording that was offered in a 2-minute television commercial. It was amazing, and we had scientists like Alan Hynek, Stan Friedman, Army Lieutenant Colonel Larry Coyne, astronauts Gordon Cooper and Jim McDivitt, Betty Hill. There was just so much about that. And also, as Peter mentioned, Dr. Hynek was pretty much commissioned by the Edmund Scientific Catalog at the time to put together what for them was the very first ever page where they offered products about UFOs. And one of the products that they included on the bottom left corner there was my album, because Dr. Hynek really thought that there was a lot about credibility going on with the people on my album, and I was very, very thankful for that. While this was all going on, the publicity for the album, I got a call from Dr. Hynek, and he asked me if I could go to North Carolina for him, because he was getting phone calls from sheriff's departments, police officers, highway patrolmen. They were calling him at the Center for UFO Studies in Illinois, complaining about seeing something strange in the skies around Lumberton, North Carolina. And in fact, this was one of the first newspaper accounts of something being seen in the skies. And so Alan asked me if I could go down there and investigate it, because he had no one else in that area, and that if I came back with enough interesting interviews and information, he would publish my story through the center. So I remember asking him, well, what exactly are they reporting? What are they seeing? And he said, well, it's something we don't hear much about. This was 1975. It's of a V-shaped object. It's like a triangular-shaped object. And that's really all I have to go on. And I said, wait a minute. You're asking me to go to North Carolina and basically try and have an appointment with a flying Dorito? He said, look, if you don't want the assignment, I can find someone else to go there. And I went, no, I'm not going to pass up an opportunity to have J. Allen Hynek call me and ask me to go check out a UFO for him. And so down to North Carolina I went. And within the first few hours of being there, I found myself in the sheriff's department on the phone here with Allen Hynek back in Illinois, telling him that maybe there really is something going on here. A lot of the people here are very credible, and there might be actually something going on. So I stuck around, and again, in the local newspapers, accounts started coming out with illustrations of what people were reporting down there. This is one shape, and I think we've got a close-up of it. Here's another close-up of that. And still someone else had actually come up with a similar triangular Dorito-shaped UFO. So while I was there in the sheriff's department, the calls started coming in. They were reporting it again. It was being seen. Into a sheriff's cruiser I went. And a few minutes later, keeping in touch with other law enforcement vehicles through the car radios, we all converged in front of a big field. It was already dark. There were stars in the sky, no moon, and the only sound that we heard after all the engines in the cars were turned off was the sound of animals sounding nervous in the area. And as we looked across this field in front of us, we could see above a line of trees, the trees are here, moving along the tops of the trees very slowly, we could see a red light alternating with a white light, just back and forth, red and white, moving slowly along the tops of the trees until it got to about midway over the trees. Then it stopped, and then it started moving across the field toward where we were standing. That was the first, oh God, moment. It's coming at us. And at first, I remember thinking, well, I'm feeling pretty okay. I'm feeling safe. I'm surrounded by these law enforcement peoples with their six-shooters. And then I went, no, wait. If this is something that's coming here to eat us, you know, how many bullets can they expend before we realize we're done for and my report will never get published? It got closer and closer to us until it just stopped above us. And this is an illustration of what I made of what we saw that night, directly above us. It was both scary and exciting all at once. The next day, when I was still alive, I contacted Pope Air Force Base near Fayetteville, North Carolina, just to see if they had anything out there the night before that they were testing in the skies over Lumberton. I would have been surprised if they had said anything different instead of, no, we didn't have anything out there. We don't know what you saw. Luckily, they didn't say it was the planet Venus. Swamp gas would have been worse. This thing was in the sky above us, not making any sound, just hovering, and you could see those lights up one side and the lights up the other side, with the brighter light in the center. And as we watched it, from the top light, a beam of light, and this is where I was referring before to beams of light coming out of a UFO. A beam of light came out of it and came right down and surrounded us where we were standing on the ground. That turned my oh God moment into oh my God moment. Now what? And you know, in the excitement of the moment, your timeline starts to shift a little bit, where you might think it took an hour. It was only maybe about 3 seconds, because I was recording the moment. I had a little handheld recorder, trying to stay calm, cool, and collected, and recording what we were seeing. Playing it back later, I realized this beam of light was only there for about 3 seconds. Then it went back up into it, and then the other lights turned off, and the whole object turned an amber red color, and it slowly turned about 45 degrees, and it started slowly moving away, as if to say, I'm done with you guys. I'm going somewhere else. And it did. We got into the cars, and we found other law enforcement personnel in different counties who had had their own encounter. The most important one to me was Police Chief Gary Moore was in his car, and he was parked near a lake, and he had reported something. We found him. He was still sitting in his car, and I said, well, what did you see? He said, well, I was just sitting here, and suddenly the whole inside of my car lit up. And I looked out the window, looked up. You know the moment in Close Encounters of the Third Kind when Richard Dreyfuss is in his truck and he looks up and this thing is above him? So the police chief said, this thing was just parked in the sky above us. So what did you do, Chief? Got out of the car, went to his trunk, and he pulled out one of those big utility official lanterns with a giant flashlight beam thing on the front of it. And he said he pointed it up at the object, and he blinked once, and it blinked back once. No Close Encounters music, but that was pretty dramatic. So I said, well, then what'd you do? He said, I blinked twice, and it blinked twice back at him. And then what happened? He said, well, it turned kind of slowly and started going away. So I found other reports, other eyewitnesses about this, and eventually wrote the story, and Dr. Hynek kindly published it through the center. I think the title of it is the Lumberton, North Carolina UFO Report. Interesting, though, when you look at the object that we saw, and I'm not saying this as a matter of fact, it's just interesting how the object that we experienced in 1975 in North Carolina, how it resembles a modern-day stealth fighter or stealth bomber. Again, I'm not saying that's what it was. This was 1975. Perhaps we were developing those kinds of technologies back then, but to have them being tested or flying around places like North Carolina, I don't know. Turns out that when these UFO sightings first started in Lumberton, a local FAA official said it was probably some Delta Wing experimental aircraft. Then they changed their mind and said they wouldn't identify who made the original statement. And so that was pretty much the end of the story. There was never any follow-up because there was nothing to follow up. Sorry, I brought a New York City cold with me. The next thing that caught my attention was happening, of all places, at the United Nations. And, sorry. Thank you for your patience. Any of you or all of you aware of the UN presentation from 1978? I'll take that as a yes. In 1977, Prime Minister Eric Gary of Grenada began to pitch the UN, other countries, on his idea. He was campaigning to get the United Nations to create some kind of an internal committee that would share and discuss UFO information between all the nations. And he made speeches, and I was reading about them, hearing these things on TV, and then nothing happened. Nobody was paying any attention to him. And I decided to make my own campaign, I created a situation where I became very friendly with the ambassadors in New York of Grenada. And through my contacts with them, I gave them a copy of my UFO record that I had done in 1975. And I said, please give this to your Prime Minister with my compliments and let him know I'd like to meet him sometime. I have an idea of something, some way that we could help each other with the United Nations and the UFO situation. And we ended up meeting, the Prime Minister and I, on the night when he became Sir Eric Gehry. He was knighted. I was invited to the UN to see the ceremony, and we met privately. And over a handshake deal, he decided that Grenada would sponsor my proposal to bring experts that I knew of, that I was friendly with, J. Allen Hynek, Stan Friedman, Gordon Cooper, and others, to bring them to the United Nations to mount an actual attempt to get the UN to be interested in this. And I said, with all due respect, Mr. Prime Minister, the UN isn't paying attention to you, but I can bring the people here who they will pay attention to. What do you say? I ended up getting a little delegate card that indicated that I was now a delegate of Grenada, and that's when I found out later through released government documents that our State Department started watching what I was doing. Because suddenly an American citizen was working for Grenada about UFOs, and there were questions that were going to be raised. And so once I made the deal with Grenada, they sent me this letter about the deal to confirm it all. And since you might not be able to see all the type, here's basically what the letter said is, we concur in your belief, the urgency of UFOs, and we'll support your proposal when the General Assembly meets later this year. So that was great. I had that part of it done. And then I contacted J. Allen Hynek, and he quickly wanted to get on board. And so he sent me a letter in which he basically said, I'm with you on this. I want to be there. I want to help you put it together. And you know how I feel about UFOs. We've worked on this before. We endorse everything you want to do about the UFO problem, especially at the United Nations. And so we started gathering our troops. And the next thing that happened that year in 1978, to bring it closer to the actual presentation, was this. In the middle of the year, on July 14th, we had a closed-door meeting at the UN headquarters with UN Secretary Kurt Waldheim, who's sitting there under the UN tapestry there in the back. But from left to right, astronaut Gordon Cooper, astronomer Jacques Vallée, French astrophysicist Claude Poher, astronomer J. Allen Hynek, Grenada Prime Minister Eric Gehry, Secretary General Waldheim, Morton Gleisner of the Special Political Committee, yours truly when I was into my Serpico heavy hair look days. Next to me was amazing, excellent, the late researcher Len Stringfield. And sitting next to him, psychologist David Saunders. It was during this meeting that we outlined our plan. The Secretary General wanted to know, what are you guys going to be doing here at the United Nations come November? And so we outlined that. And one of the things that happened right after the meeting was over is that it was about this time that I was invited to join Dr. Hynek and Dr. Vallée, who had just been getting a lot of publicity because of their involvement with Steven Spielberg's film, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This was 7 months after Close Encounters premiered, and Steven wanted to meet with us and wanted to know if he could be of any help to us in preparing for our United Nations event. And he ended up supplying us with a variety of visual materials that we used. These are materials that he had used in the research and the production of the movie, and he said we could show any of this to the countries at the UN. And I basically then spent the next 4 months gathering all of my materials for our upcoming presentation in November. And during the process of putting this stuff together, during one of my trips to Illinois, where I met with Hynek many times, and we were putting a package together of documents that we were going to present to all the countries of the world. And I said to him one day, Alan, you know, this is great. We've got some interesting military documents, but you know what's going to make, what I think is going to have a bigger impact? We need a smoking gun. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, we need something that we can give to every country that the public doesn't know about, and have it be something where everybody's going to stand up and go, whoa, why didn't they tell us about this before? And so he walked over to his filing cabinet, and he opened it up, gave me an envelope, and inside the envelope was this. And I said, well, what exactly is this? He said, well, this was a chapter from a former United States Air Force Academy textbook, a physics textbook called Introductory Space Science. It was written by military officials and was only for the eyes of Academy cadets. This was not published material. Chapter 33 was simply titled Unidentified Flying Objects. And it's a 14-page chapter. And I started thumbing through the chapter. And by the way, this chapter was in 1968. Project Blue Book officially ended in 1969, and shortly thereafter, this chapter was deleted in this version. 14-page chapter that spelled out in clear words what the Air Force felt about UFOs in 1968, despite its public stance that there was nothing of any real interest or scientific value that the public should care about. And among some of the things that the chapter talked about were, we're going to present evidence to you that UFOs are global, they've been around for thousands of years, and in fact that the Air Force was telling its cadets that the phenomenon deserves some kind of valid scientific investigation, but they never said that publicly. We never heard that. The next slide. The most stimulating theory for us is that the UFOs are material objects that are either manned or remote controlled by beings who are alien to this planet. Really? There is some evidence supporting this viewpoint. Really? I mean, I was standing there in front of Hynek going through this stuff, and I'm going, really? Are you kidding me? Why didn't you give this to me before? And Hynek, I love the man, he was like my grandfather, but he would say to me, I either didn't know that it was all that important. What are you talking about? How could this not be an important? Well, you asked me, and so that prompted me to go pull this out of my file cabinet. Is it okay? And I said, yeah, this is great. I'm going to make about a gazillion copies of this, which I did. And we're going to hand it out at the UN, which we did. And then eventually it hit the internet. Look at a little bit more of this, where they get into one section of why no contact. Interesting. We may be the object of intense sociological, and psychological study. You don't contact a colony of ants, and humans may seem that way to any aliens. I love the variation. A zoo is fun to visit, but you don't contact the lizards. Such contact may have already taken place on a different plane of awareness. Again, really? Why don't we know about this? But don't worry, Alan, this is good. This is good stuff. A little more. The available data leaves us with the unpleasant possibility of alien visitors to our planet. The questionable data there are suggests the existence of at least 3 and maybe 4 different groups of aliens, possibly at different stages of development. You can't make this stuff up, folks. You know, someone in the military was writing this for Academy cadets to see. It implies the existence of intelligent life on a majority of the planets in our solar system, or a surprisingly strong interest in Earth by members of other solar systems. Just to let you know, if you're interested in having a copy of the whole 14-page UFO chapter. Find me later, see me later. I didn't bring it all with me because that would have been printing up like 500 pages of 14 pages. Come see me, give me your business cards or your email addresses, and when I get back to New York, I'll send it off to you instantly when I'm back, and you'll have it in your mailbox. So I want everybody to see this. Here's an example. This is just a good place to show you of how media doesn't always get it right. I won't name the publication where this came from, but I will give you some of the high points, where it says in 1979 in Miami. Well, no, that's already not true. This didn't take place, the UN thing didn't take place in 1979, it was 78. It wasn't in Miami, it was in New York. An ad hoc conference of UFO experts. Attending were Gary, Waldheim, and a trio. A trio? There was a lot more than a trio involved with this. And then it says the above photo was taken at the Miami conference. No, I don't think so. It was at this meeting that a bloodless coup put Maurice Bishop in power in Grenada and ousted Gary, and with the ouster of Gary, the UFO talks stopped. And I was thinking, wait a minute, I was there. I was at all the meetings. The coup didn't happen while we were putting the presentation together. This was just all falsehoods. And this does happen a lot. And yet, here was Gary still in power in Grenada in 1978, giving a speech at the UN, talking to the world about our upcoming UFO presentation and how the reports of UFOs were consistent, as back in this image. And on the morning of November 27th, 1978, our presentation began. And it started off with Dr. J. Allen Hynek, first with a speech telling the international delegates of the importance of creating a global UFO investigation committee. Right after that, following Dr. Hynek, was astronomer Jacques Vallée, who, as many of you probably remember, he was the real-life scientist portrayed by Francois Truffaut in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And when he was done, then we brought up Army Captain Larry Coyne, whose 1973 helicopter UFO incident, one of the most riveting UFO encounters of all time, because he was the commander of a 4-man crew over Ohio that almost collided with a giant cigar-shaped UFO. They thought they were going to collide with it. It got to where they were bracing for impact, and then it stopped, and it hovered over their helicopter. It shined green light into their cabin, and then suddenly they all felt that the helicopter was being pulled up quickly by whatever this thing was that was above them. It had no wings, no vertical, no horizontal stabilizers. It just pulled them right up. And then suddenly, with a bump, it let them go. And then they were able to fly home. And the Army, for whatever their reasons, allowed them to have a press conference and talk about the encounter. And so I thought it would be great to have Larry Coyne as one of my main speakers at the United Nations. And he said to me, well, I'd like to do it. I'd like to tell a story. But you got to get permission from my commanding officer in Illinois. And I said, or in Ohio. And I said, all right, well, give me the guy's name, give me his number, and I'll call him. Is he going to give me any kind of resistance? He says, well, I don't know. I don't know how the conversation is going to go, but you should at least try. So I did. I called the commanding officer, and I outlined what I was doing and how I wanted to use Captain Coyne in the presentation. And the guy said, yeah, we will let him go to New York and speak at your presentation. And I went, really? Great. That's it? He said, well, no, there's one thing. We will only ask one condition. And I said, okay, you name it. We don't want him to appear at the United Nations in a uniform, in any kind of a military or official capacity. So I said to the guy, so you're saying that even if I have to buy the guy a suit, it's okay for him to come to the UN? And they said, yeah. And there he is in his civilian suit. I didn't buy it, but he showed up, and he brought with him, it was like a 20 or 30-page handwritten account of the encounter, and he was very nervous about doing it, but he was the most riveting presenter that day at the UN because of his credibility and just because of the story, and it's always remained unexplained. And after he was done talking, before the afternoon session, which began with Stan Friedman, we had a press conference. We adjourned to another area for the conference, and at the far left, sitting next to me, is Stan Friedman in the greatest suit of all time. Well, it was 1978, and Stan then would talk to the member nations later that afternoon. Here's another shot of us again, just all at the press conference. And if you look very closely, you might actually see a look of scowl in my eyes, because by that point in the relationship that I was having with the Prime Minister, we weren't getting along at that point, and he wanted to take over everything about the presentation, including the press conference. And you can see Dr. Hynek doesn't seem too excited about being there. And the look on my face is, okay, Mr. Prime Minister, you can go away now, and let's continue on with the more important parts of this. One of those important parts was, even though Gordon Cooper was at the earlier July meeting, he couldn't actually make the final presentation in November. So I asked him to write a letter which offered his personal views on UFOs and why astronauts don't like talking about them. And he sent the letter, and which has since been printed all around the world. This is what the letter looked like. And since you probably can't read it that way, I've printed up some of the juicier parts about how he wanted to convey his views on extraterrestrial visitors that are here, where he says he believes these vehicles and their crews are visiting this planet from other planets. I mean, he went on and on. There's more in the letter. We need to have a top-level coordinated program to scientifically collect all the data. We may first have to show them that we have learned to resolve our problems by peaceful means. Is that going to happen anytime soon? But he had good intentions. Then he described his own encounters of UFOs and why astronauts won't talk about them because of the ridicule factor involved with them. And that was, again, it was one of the most amazing parts of the presentation, and that letter is available. I can send that to you too if you can't find it on the internet. The whole sequence of events that began in 1977, watching Eric Airy trying to convince the UN and nobody listening to him, how we met was just kind of amazing to me, until when the United States and the Soviet Union finally, after our presentation, when they decided to veto the resolution, at that point, it was a resolution called Decision GA 426, where member nations could coordinate, if they wanted to, an effort to collect and share data about UFOs, if they wanted to. And then they would have to inform the Secretary General of their findings, if they so desired. But after the US and Soviet Union didn't show any interest, nothing was eventually done that year, and the resolution has been lying dormant to this day. I will say that Gary was ousted from power the following year, and 4 years later, in 1983, the United States invaded Grenada to help restore a constitutional government there. It was quite a time, and I have to tell you, I was sitting at home one night when the news came on that announced that we had just invaded Grenada, and I didn't want to leave my apartment because I suddenly thought I was responsible for this. It's my fault that we just invaded a little Caribbean country. My friends had to calm me down. I didn't want to go anywhere or talk to anybody. I felt responsible. But I will say that one of the offshoots about the whole UFO event was that I became a feature writer for at the time, a new consumer science magazine called Omni. And this was my first story. It was a cover story about the UN presentation. There was one other amazing thing that happened as an offshoot of the UN event. And what I'm about to show you has rarely been seen in public. I don't want anybody running out of here. I don't want you to throw things at me, please. But what I'm about to show you, get ready, is a real alien. Okay, are you ready for this? Okay, here he comes. I bet you've never seen anything like that before. At the end of 1978, when I was working on the UN event, I got a call from NBC Radio in New York. They heard what I was doing at the UN, and they said, would you like to come on NBC Radio and broadcast nightly UFO reports? And I said, are you going to pay me for this? Because I knew that my funding from Grenada was almost over. And they said, yeah, we'll pay you for this, and you can come on, and are you going to let me talk about anything I want? Yeah, we'll let you do what you want. Just don't say anything that will get us into any kind of lawsuits. So I said, sure. And then the program director said to me, oh, there's one other thing. For the first year that you're going to be here at NBC, we'd like to keep your real identity a secret. All right, and what does that mean? Well, you know, the movie Alien is about to premiere. This was 1978, 79. I said, yeah. We would like to introduce you on the air as the WNBC radio alien. I said, well, okay, but I can feel my credibility going down and down. And I said, well, how are you going to get around this? He said, it'll be great. We're a rock and roll station. The audience loves us. They'll like anything that we do. And I went, all right. And I said to him, but you know, people on the radio, they often have to make public appearances. So how are we going to get around that? He said, don't worry. And what they did was, because it was NBC, they had the costume department of Saturday Night Live create this costume for me. And they took all my measurements. This head could only fit my head because they took very, very close measurements, and I could hardly breathe in this thing. Here's a picture of me getting into the outfit. I will say, because you can't recognize him, you probably wouldn't recognize him anyway. The man standing behind me with more hair than I have, his name is Bob Pittman. He was the program director at NBC Radio. He brought the station to the #2 position in radio stations around America. Shortly after he hired me to do this, he left to start a little company called MTV. And he's now the CEO and the chairman of the board of Premier Radio Networks, the biggest radio conglomerate on the planet, and the people who own Coast to Coast AM. But he started off making me an alien on NBC. So it wasn't enough to get me the costume and to get me into the costume. Now the question was, well, we've got some public appearances coming up. How are we going to get in there safely? So we have to hire a couple of guards, 2 armed guards, security agents, to protect me on the streets of New York from any overzealous fans, from any pissed off real aliens. And for some odd reason, it didn't affect my on-air credibility. So I was able to, and I only had to be the alien for 1 year. I'll tell you a very quick story about that. I used to write my UFO reports each day. If I was running late, I'd be on a subway going from the Upper West Side of Manhattan to 30 Rock, where I did my studio work. And one day, I was sitting there on the subway, and I had a legal-sized yellow pad, and I was writing my script. UFOs seen over blah, 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 you know. And I'm writing, and I noticed that sitting next to me in the subway is this kid, 18 or 19 years old. I could tell he was a messenger because he had his messenger bike and it looked like he had some packages. And he was looking at me, and I'm just writing and writing. And all of a sudden, he leaned over to me and said, "Hey, man, are you the alien?" I don't know who was more excited. When I said yes, or the fact that he figured out who I was. He was reading my scripts, and he went, "Oh my God, no one's going to believe I met the alien today." I said, "Look, I'll tell you what, are you a messenger?" "Yeah, I am." I never forgot his name, Louis Montalvo. Louis, if you're out there, I never forgot you. I said, "Do you have to deliver those packages like right now, or can you get them a little late? Will that like affect your job?" He said, "No, what do you got in mind?" I said, "Would you like to come to NBC and watch me do my reports?" "Oh, yeah, man, yeah." So I brought him over to NBC, got him through security. We went into the studio. I did my alien reports for the night. And he was like, "I can't believe this." And I was, internally, I was going, "I can't believe this guy figured out that Clark Kent is Superman." And we parted ways. And about a week later, I get a package, a little box, nicely wrapped, Montalvo, return address. And I'm thinking, what is this? Has he sent me a bomb? And I opened it up, and inside this thing, and I wish I had a picture to show you, but it's stored away in New York. He sent me this, about this tall, a robot, like the Lost in Space robot, or Robbie the robot from the movies. And it was a combination robot. In the center of its chest was a clock, and below the chest was an AM dial. Because my reports were on AM, not FM. And it was an AM radio robot that the guy just sent me. I never forgot it, never threw it away. People over the years said, "Get rid of it, it's junk." I said, "It's not junk. Are you kidding? I mean, this robot is me. I'm the alien. Leave me alone." But, I mean, a great story, and I'll never forget the guy. When I started on NBC in 1978, Stan Friedman called to tell me about something he had stumbled on involving military people and an event that the public didn't know much about that had taken place in a little town near Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. And of course, we all know the amazing headlines. Stan had met Jesse Marcel, Major Jesse Marcel, who had been one of the officers who picked up the pieces of whatever it was that crashed out there. And Stan wanted to know if I wanted to talk to Jesse Marcel. This was before there was like much information out at all about Roswell. And I said, "Yeah, it sounds like a good story. Something good for the alien to report about." And I ended up doing, with Stan's help, a 5-part series about this thing called Roswell, New Mexico, where I interviewed Jesse Marcel, some of the other folks who had been there, who had actually handled some of the original material. And as we all know, we know this famous headline that started the whole media frenzy back on July 8th, but of course the very next day, it was changed to reflect that it really was a weather balloon, and off we went into years of speculation and debate over what really happened in Roswell. But I never would have known about it, and I never would have written about it if it hadn't been for Stan Friedman. The man is a dogged interviewer and investigator. Now, something else that happened, there was once a time when UFO sightings turned out to be easily identified objects like weather balloons, lenticular clouds, satellites, meteorites, planets, conventional aircraft, weather anomalies, and the old standby swamp gas. But now, watch out, here come the drones. Okay? Not only do these unmanned objects look like UFOs or flying saucers, but many of them are actually deliberately made and offered to the public inexpensively to actually look like flying saucers. Here's a case in point. Last year, during a baseball game in Vancouver, British Columbia, an odd-looking object rose above some trees beyond the stadium's right field, and it was captured on a very short video segment. And in this is a zoomed-in image of the object, and it appears to be, well, flying saucer with a row of lights around its rim. And as you can imagine, it made a few headlines as people wondered, what baseball-loving planet did this UFO arrive from? Turned out it was a deliberate hoax created by a local space and science center. They built a drone to look like a flying saucer, and they flew it around Vancouver as a way to promote their new planetarium building. And here's a close-up of it again. On the left, Open Minds TV ace reporter, investigator, Alejandro Rojas, who was with us this weekend, uncovered the truth about this whole thing. He went looking for the truth, made lots of phone calls, and just before the Science Center issued a press release admitting what they did, Alejandro came up with the facts, wrote this story, and this is an image that shows the UFO drone on the left as it appeared at the baseball game, and on the right, a crystal clear view of the drone during one of its test flights. You know, it is what it is, and I congratulate Alejandro, I congratulate Jason McClellan, Maureen Ellsbury, everybody from Open Minds for all the great work that they do to bring us credible information about all UFO stories. And here comes another interesting story that also broke a few months ago. John Podesta, former White House chief of staff under President Clinton, was named as President Obama's new advisor. What does it have to do with UFOs? Podesta is a very strong advocate of UFOs. He's gone on record several times urging the United States government to come clean on UFO information that he says it's been holding back from the public. Here are some of the comments from him that he has said in public about how it's time for the government, the U.S., to open its books. This was a former White House chief of staff. And it's time to find out what the truth really is. And so we're kind of waiting to see whether or not he'll stay true to his stance on UFOs and use his new advisory position to sway the president on this topic. Wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall during some of those conversations at the White House? We'll just have to wait and see how Podesta's relationship works out with Obama. Another event that happened last year that will hopefully have far-reaching impact on the official attitude about UFOs and the possibility of alien visitors to Earth, as you probably all know, took place last year in Washington. We've already heard some things about this. Stephen Bassett won an amazing award last night for all of his efforts. Just to quickly recap, between April 29th and May 3rd of last year, an international group of researchers, activists, military and political witnesses all traveled to Washington for a week-long presentation where 40 individuals representing 10 countries gave testimony to 6 former members of the United States Congress. I wrote a daily online Huffington Post blog of the 5-day event. And during the whole time that this was going on, here on the left, there was always a group of eyewitnesses presenting testimony and evidence to the panel of former congressional members seated on the right. This citizen hearing on disclosure, as I said, was put together by Stephen Bassett, the executive director of the Paradigm Research Group. And Steve will be speaking here tonight on his ongoing efforts at UFO disclosure. I urge you to see what he has to say. During the citizen hearing, every individual and group of those giving testimony had to swear to tell the truth. So the upshot of the hearing was to try and get the former members of Congress to come together and push for a new real congressional investigation into UFOs, and to move it even further for another possible United Nations presentation on the UFO subject, and we're all hoping that this happens. Now, here's something that is either going to anger you or amuse you, or both. It just happened a few days ago. Earlier this week, Apollo 11 astronaut Buzz Aldrin stopped by the Huffington Post to appear on our HuffPost Live television program. He was there to promote the upcoming 45th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing, and that anniversary, by the way, is tomorrow. Knowing he was going to be there, I spoke with the producers of the show, and I said, here's what you've got to do when Buzz Aldrin comes here for the interview. Here's what you should ask him about. And I said to them, a few years ago, Aldrin was on an interview with C-SPAN, and nobody even asked him about this. He just blurted it out. He said on that C-SPAN interview, there's a monolith on the Martian moon of Phobos, and we need to go back there. We need to have a continuing effort space program to go back and see what this monolith structure is. We need to find out what it is, how it got there, who put it there. As far as I can tell you now, the universe put it there. And then they broke for a little commercial break on C-SPAN, and when they came back from the break, there was no follow-up. And I thought, what? No follow-up? And there's been no follow-up for 4 or 5 years. So a year ago, I contacted Aldrin's PR people, and I said, I'd like to interview Mr. Aldrin on a variety of things. And they said, well, because you're with Huffington Post, maybe we can work that out. Would you please send us over the questions you want to ask him? I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And I did. And I put a bunch of questions together, and they got back to me a day or two later and said, we're sorry, Mr. Aldrin is very busy now. He has some family-related things that he needs to take care of. He won't be able to talk with you now. We'll try again some other time. So I thought, well, okay. And in the meantime, this just kind of stayed with me. And then when I found out that Buzz was going to be in my building on Monday, that's when I decided to, make my own crusade. And so I gave the producers of HuffPost Live the original C-SPAN interview with him. I also gave them low, high, and high resolution, medium resolution pictures of the monolith. This is what we're talking about. It's just sitting there on Phobos. Odd-looking thing, rectangular or square-looking top, casting a very long shadow. Like, yeah, what is this? So I wanted to find out, and I wanted to give them this information. And so during the interview with Buzz on Monday, and I was sitting at my desk, on the floor above them, waiting to type, because I wanted to type the story. I wanted to see anything that he would respond to would be news, I figured. Well, I was kind of right. Here's what he said. I don't have it on video now, but in the story that I'm going to write, I'm going to have the whole video, and you can see it. Here's what Buzz Aldrin said. I firmly believe it's a natural occurrence, very, very unusual one, but I can play games with the alien community and the UFOs and say, now that's really a giant antenna, so that all the aliens in other parts of the galaxy can communicate through that antenna to the aliens that are all around us. Okay, here comes the good part. The monolith isn't really extraordinary until we go there and look at it. And if I can get these nuts, we're not talking about a jar of peanuts, if I can get these nuts who are adamant about there being aliens all around us, if I can get those people to get enthusiastic about the moon of Mars, for whatever reason, I'll use their enthusiasm to get the public enthusiastic about the moon. Really, Buzz? You're going to get all of us nuts to help you out in your crusade to get back to Phobos? So I was a little angry. And instead of writing my story right then and there, I took a slight detour And while Buzz was still on the show, I sent a note to Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 lunar module pilot who also walked on the moon. He has a different viewpoint about people who are nuts when it comes to UFOs and possible alien visitors on Earth. And I know Edgar. We've done interviews many times. So I sent him a note and I said, hey, Edgar, this is what Buzz Aldrin just said on HuffPost Live. These are the words he used and the word nuts. I know that you don't necessarily agree with him on this. How about you and I getting together and let's do an interview and let's kind of update your opinion on people who are nuts, including yourself, Edgar, because you must be a nut because you believe that we are being visited, and we've been visited for a very long time. So Edgar wrote back to me right away and said, yes, any day next week, anytime, do it, let's talk. So we're going to talk this week to offer his slightly different opinion from Buzz Aldrin's, and that will be my upcoming piece of news that's fit to paint this week. And I'm excited because I'm not trying to pit one famous astronaut against the other, but you know what? You can't believe everything that everybody says, no matter who they are, no matter what their stature, no matter how important, no matter whether he was the second man to walk on the moon or not. If he says that people who believe that aliens are visiting us are nuts, sorry, Buzz, but there's evidence to the contrary to that. And we can't just let his words be the only words out there in which to consider all of this. So it was just so easy to find Edgar, who said, yeah, sure, count me in. So I'm very happy that that's going to happen with Edgar. Whether you believe that some UFOs may, in fact, be from another planet or dimension, or if it's all one big hoax, and that every single UFO and report and photograph and video can be explained, one thing is certain. We live on a planet that's in what is known as the Goldilocks zone. It's an area where the planet is at just the right distance from its home sun as a way of inhabiting life, the conditions for life, or at least life as we know it, to inhabit the planet because of how far or how close we are to our sun. Recent data from the Kepler spacecraft confirmed the discovery of an Earth-sized planet in orbit around another sun about 500 light years from Earth. And it's in the constellation known as Cygnus. This planet is only one of several that orbit this particular star. We should remember that our sun is just one out of billions of suns in the Milky Way galaxy. NASA's Kepler spacecraft has shown us already hundreds of other possible Earth-like planets. We don't know whether or not Earthlings could live on one of these planets or if anyone else is already living there. We only know that the possibilities of life elsewhere are growing every day. The vastness of the universe is absolutely staggering to our minds. What you're looking at here is an image of a very small section of the night sky above us. Our Milky Way galaxy contains billions of stars or suns that have planets in orbit around them. Mass media doesn't always get it right when it comes to UFO reports. We have to do it better because in the end, truth is better than deception or hoaxes. And those of us who try to report stories with a sense of credibility would really like to keep the public informed. But we need to do a better job. And we need to try and understand that we live in a galaxy that's just one of billions out there, as this Hubble telescope image shows us. But it gets even better than that. I'm not sure if you saw this. This is an image that was released by NASA just last month The space agency called it the most colorful and spectacular picture ever captured by the Hubble Space Telescope. It's made up of many images taken between 2003 and 2012. What you're looking at are approximately 10,000 galaxies of different shapes and sizes. And to give you an idea of how far away a lot of these galaxies are, if we zoom in on just a small section of this picture, we see what appear to be individual stars in the background because they look like dots on the screen. But these aren't stars. These are more distant galaxies that contain their own billions of stars or suns. This is why scientists now believe there are billions and billions of galaxies out there. The deeper we focus the Hubble camera into the cosmos, the more distant galaxies appear to us, almost making us insignificant. But we're not insignificant. We are a vital growing species. And it's so important that those of us in media continue to generate accurate information about UFOs and what may really be out there surrounding us. It will propel us into a future where we inevitably may find the answer to the ultimate question, which is, are we alone? Or are we just citizens in what has turned out to be a very crowded neighborhood? I will continue to do my best to keep the public informed about UFOs. I will keep writing all the news that's fit to paint. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Can I leave that? Thank you for your patience also. I appreciate it.